Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Steve Staples. I'm the director of the Rideau Institute, a public interest policy research and advocacy group based here in Ottawa. I'm very happy to present to you today Ms. Liz Bernstein from the Nobel Women's Initiative. She's the director of this organization whose office is here in Ottawa. And we are also very pleased to welcome the winner of the 1997 Nobel Peace Prize and chair of the Nobel Women's Initiative, Ms. Jody Williams. We'll begin with an introduction by Ms. Bernstein.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you all for joining us today. Jody Williams est la 10e femme d'avoir gagné le prix Nobel de la paix. Elle a gagné le prix il y a 10 ans pour son travail avec la campagne internationale pour interdire les mines antipersonnelles. Lundi, on va fêter le 10e anniversaire de la signature de ce traité ici à Ottawa. 2 years ago, she founded, with her sister Nobel Peace Prize laureates, the Nobel Women's Initiative, which is a group of laureates helping to support women's rights and peace activists around the world. With no further ado, I introduce Jody Williams.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Steve. Hello. Thank you for having me here. Primarily, I'm going to speak about Darfur and my own experience in that area when I led a UN mission on the situation in the Sudan and recommendations to the UN Human Rights Council as to what it could do to protect the civilians who are suffering in Darfur. Also, recommendations to the Canadian government as to what Canada can do to try to stop the war crimes, crimes against humanity, and ethnic cleansing that continue in the Darfur region and threaten overall peace and security in Sudan as well as regionally. And I would conclude with just a couple of comments about landmines and cluster munitions at the end, since Liz did mention the fact that I'm also here celebrating the 10th anniversary of the signing of the Mine Ban Treaty. It was 10 years ago on the 3rd and 4th of December that we all came to Ottawa, and 122 nations signed that Mine Ban Treaty in 2 days, and it was one of the most amazing days of my life. I would say that the only thing that surpassed that experience was the day that the treaty was successfully negotiated and concluded in Norway in September of that same year. First, Darfur. As I mentioned, I was the head of a UN mission on Darfur. We all know the situation there. The fact that the government of Khartoum has been carrying out a counterinsurgency program against the people of Darfur. It has been using Janjaweed militia, as they are called. It's the Arab tribes, the nomadic tribes that they have been using to try to move the sedentary African tribes out of the region and actually award the Janjaweed militia the land that they are then freeing up. One thing that surprises me is that it is very often left unsaid that while it is Arab tribes and Black African tribes, they're all Muslim. So sometimes it seems to be portrayed as Arabs against Africans, and that's a little element, but they're all Muslims. Everybody, the overwhelming majority of the people of the Sudan are Muslims. And so to not mention that part of the issue, I think, is quite significant, and it still confuses me as to why it is not mentioned. When I led the mission, I didn't find out any new facts or things that we don't already know. That Khartoum has been carrying out a counterinsurgency campaign. It has carried out war crimes, crimes against crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing. It has used rape as a weapon of war. The women of Darfur have been traumatized by gang rape. The purpose of that rape is not just that it's random rogue soldiers raping women. It is a tactic of the counterinsurgency campaign in order to destroy the fabric of society. When those women are gang raped and released, their husbands almost inevitably immediately divorce them. They are left with whatever children they have of that husband. The community is very hard-pressed to accept them. Offspring, babies that come about from those rapes are often left to die. Infanticide is not something that is talked about a lot in Darfur, but it does happen. When I led the mission, it wasn't those facts that was the most troubling in some ways, and that's kind of bizarre to say, I know. What was really troubling to me was the way the UN Human Rights Commission dealt with the whole situation. In theory, our mission was sent to assess the situation and then to report back to the UN Human Rights Council as to what they could do to protect the human rights of the people of Darfur. We also made other recommendations to the government in Khartoum, to the rebel forces themselves, who were also beginning to carry out human rights violations, and to the United Nations overall. Unfortunately, only one recommendation was accepted by the Council, and so far it has not brought about dramatic change in the situation in Darfur. And what was very disturbing to me is that the states themselves, the governments that form part of that Human Rights Council, who are entrusted with the protection of human rights of people all over the world, were more interested in protecting state sovereignty than protecting the people of Darfur. Oftentimes we're told that it's the governments of the West who are the great protectors of human rights. My mission was threatened by governments of the West as much as it was harassed by the government of Sudan itself, other allies of the Sudan. Western nations actually tried to get me to write a report that would be kind to everybody, a report that everybody would be happy with. And if you think about that, it's patently absurd. How could you write a report on the war crimes, crimes against humanity, mass rape, ethnic cleansing that could possibly make the perpetrator of that counterinsurgency campaign happy? It's patently impossible. And yet a Western state, Western European nation, tried to get me to do that. Another Western European state tried to get me to just kill the report altogether and not deliver it. Both of them in the interests of preserving this new human rights body. In my view, if the Human Rights Council of the United Nations is only there to protect the governments rather than to protect the people who need their rights protected, it has no business existing. And since that seems to be the case, it becomes even more incumbent upon governments like Canada to take a real leadership role in stopping the carnage in Darfur. It is spilling over into other countries in the region. Central African Republic has refugees now from Darfur. It is also in Chad. We're seeing chaos throughout the region in general. The peace talks that were attempted to be carried out in Libya are now in shambles. Nothing is happening because the rebel groups are fractioned. Khartoum went and they were able to take the moral high ground and say, well, we're here, the rebel groups don't care. And that is not the case. The rebel groups are fractioning, and it is getting more destructive, but Khartoum does not want to see peace brought to that part of the country. In fact, its stalling tactics have been part of the reason that the rebel groups have fractured, and we see shambles not only in the peace negotiations, but in the whole region, and possibly threatening the North-South peace accord that took 20 years to bring about, essentially. When we see that nothing is happening under the auspices of the United Nations, we need countries who have a history of peacekeeping, who have a history of caring about peace in the world and a better humanity, take the lead. We need Canada to do more. It has done a lot. It's the fourth largest provider of aid to refugees and people in Darfur. Providing aid is good. But as long as the resolution of the conflict continues to evade us, they will just have to keep providing aid and aid and aid and aid. And I think sometimes governments like Canada that do have such a history of peacekeeping think that the only answer is to send troops.